Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we are continuing with our series, the Torah of today, where we're trying to develop for ourselves a clear path in Avodas Hashem of practical engagement with this world. And what we ended off with last week was that part of the reason that we feel so overwhelmed in the territory of the heart, in the area of the lave, that emotional frequency of the self, is because we've never really taught ourselves that we have Bechira in that place. We've understood that we have the capacity to reorient and to rewrite our cognitive distortions, to think differently. But because of the rapid speed, the intensity, and the viscerality of emotional experience and the moods within which we find ourselves, we have let go of the belief that we're Bali Bechira. We have let go of the belief that we can actually make a choice as to how we would like to direct our feelings and ultimately how we would like to engage in this world. And we said that the first thing that we're going to have to do is reopen up a space or a point, a vantage point where the self can look out upon the emotional process of the self so that we can actually have a fighting chance at choosing to feel or choosing to redirect the flow of emotional energy in a way that we feel is best for us. When we find ourselves caught up within the current of the emotion, it's nearly impossible for a person to break free and reorient themselves to that emotion. When it comes to the wisdom of emotions, when it comes to the wisdom of any theory that talks about the development of emotions or the neurological basis of emotions or the effective neuroscience of emotions, in the end of the day, there is no theory of emotionality that is going to be deeper and more correct than what a 3-year-old child is going to say when they're throwing a tantrum. Why are you in this mood? Just cause. There's a statement that has gone around that says that thoughts don't necessarily care about feelings, which, whether it's true or not, is not the point for discussion. But what is certainly true is that feelings do not care about our thoughts. When we find ourselves caught up in the current, in the speed, in the tidal wave of that viscerality that we feel like we're animal, and now we have to respond to whatever triggers in front of us, the individual is almost without Bechira. The first thing that needs to happen in order to create a vantage point at which we can have a chance or bechira is making space. We have to create a point at which I can stop myself and say, in spite of the fact that the emotional current continues to rage on with intensity, in spite of the fact that the current of thoughts continue to race on with the intensity that they race, nevertheless, I am going to make a bechira that I'm going to stand here. I'm going to firmly plant my feet in this moment and create a pivot point, create a lookout point, be mitzamsim, to make a makom within the lack of space so that I can choose to look at what I would want to look at and to think about what I would like to think about and to feel the way I would like to feel. This making of space, this carving out of space is the first step of regulating the territory of self. The individual has to learn how to make space in two different places. And it's specifically in the places that we feel most overwhelmed, where we feel that we do not have the ability to make a choice because of the over inundation of experience or feeling or intensity or viscerality or craving or trigger, whatever animalistic desire has awoken, whatever midah has taken over the scene to color every expression of experience. I have to make a space prior to that where I say, I am actually in control as to how I would like to orient myself. The thoughts rush on, the feelings rush on, but the self has the ability to make a point of Bechira, and the first step of Bechira is making an empty space, to engrave a halal. So, how does one create that space? Well, the first way is by slowing down. The first thing that we have to recognize is that just because the speed of my mind is moving in a certain way, and just because my emotions are operating in a certain way, it doesn't define my capacity to detach myself and to detether myself from that rapid flow and to gain a different vantage point. If I am only looking at the externalization and the external layers of self, which are exposed to the rapid nature of thinking and the rapid nature of feeling, so then I am victim to that rapid nature, and everything is moving so quickly, and I can't even grab hold of anything. And maybe in this world, I could pray that I might get lucky enough to grab hold of one element of thought or experience that slows down slowly enough so I could experience it, but then the rest is going to be carried away in the zerem and the speed of thinking. But that posture, which is the deep externalization of self, which lets itself just become victim to the rapid flow and intensity of the thought or the emotion. The secret of Bechira is abstracting the self, is moving a step inwards outside and away from that revelation of self and inwards, furrowing inwards and creating a space, a cave within the self. It is only in this negative action, this digging inwards, this symptom, this removal of a priorly held fullness that allows me to create a crevice within myself so that I can now have a vantage point. This making space, this pause, seems so impossible to us, A, because of the rapid speed in which the emotions are operating, but also because it runs counterintuitive to that capitalistic mindset, which has been the way that we functioned in our mindlessness. We are fundamentally rooted in the belief that I am only valuable if I am productive, and I am going to be judged based on my productivity. And the benefits that my product can convey to other people is going to be the determinant factor when developing the worth of something or the value of something. And therefore, a person becomes a slave to production, a slave to becoming more than what they are, a slave towards revelation, a slave towards trying to feel something in the hopes that we can reach that point of validation or that kind of authentication of experience. And because we're so used to judging things based on the externalized measure, so we search for external markers that impose senses of success upon me. But because we've developed this notion that the only true productivity and the only true creativity is one that is forwards facing or one that expresses itself outwards so that others can see, we have lost sight on the work of the negative. We have lost sight on the fact that creating negative space, creating an empty space, winnowing out the intensity and making room for myself inside, beyond the eye's view, beyond what the world can see, beyond what can be expressed externally. That too is the work of creativity. There too, the self is going to be forced to utilize even stronger parts of itself to learn how to move inwards, to make a cave for the self, to engage with all of the strength of my mind and my heart, to actually say, I am not going to allow myself to continue with this dysregulated flood of thought because I only get to live once. And if I only get to live once, I have to be utilizing the bechira that's given to me to try and allow myself to experience moments. If a person doesn't know how to make moments out of their day, then the day is going to feel like a tidal wave of simply hour falling into another hour, overwhelmingness making way to more overwhelmingness. And at the end of the day, this person is going to feel empty-handed and frustrated over the fact that they're empty-handed. But if a person wants to learn how to be ma'arich their days, how to extend and elongate their days, that means that I have to uncover the myriad moments of each and every day, which represent days within themselves, so that each and every day is nothing than the composite of all of these moments that are contained within this 24-hour period. That every moment is an opportunity for me to experience the full totality of the beginning, the middle, and the end. But that's only going to be if I learn how to isolate each moment, if I learn how to be present enough in each moment so that there can be a revach ben hadvekim, so that there can be a space that is given between that which was previously connected, so that one thing can take shape and become a real thing so that I can actually experience it. So it's only in separating myself and detaching myself from that rapid flow and the speed in which my mind and my heart seem to be moving so that I can slow down and I can let the moment last. Now, at first sight, this act of slowing down, this act of tzimtzum, this making space, this congealment of the self, the arresting development of the self rather than the rapid flow of the self, this is the tzimtzum. This is how we make a halal within ourselves. There has to be a halal in the mind and there has to be a halal in the heart. There is the gimel halalei moicha, what the Zohar HaKadosh refers to as the nature of the mind in its anatomical and neurobiological shape, is the cavities of the mind, the halalei moicha. the chalal of the galgalta, the cavity of the brain. And we also know that there's the libi chalal bakirbi. There has to be a halal made in the heart as well. Why is there a halal? Why is there a space that needs to be made in these two territories? Because, like we said, the individual is walking along a path in this world. And because every path is in a status of danger, as Rav Tzadok HaKohen Meir explains explicitly with regards to human consciousness in the first piece in Risisei Laila, because this life and human consciousness is a derech, it's a path, and any path is subject to dangers and disorganization and dysregulation and all of the botheredness and the heaviness and the short-temperedness that we carry with ourselves. So Hashem gives us two companions, which are really one. It's Echad Shushtaim. There are two expressions of the self, these two companions that walk along with me on my path in this world that give me a fighting chance of being able to develop Bechira. And that is the Moach and the Lev, the mind and the heart. The mind, which is the Chachma, and the heart, which is the Bina. Now, we've spoken a lot about Chachma and Bina and what they mean in terms of their partsufim, and now we're going to talk about it by way of Mi Basari Echaze Eloikim, that by way of my flesh I shall come to behold God, meaning to say, by way of drawing down these Kabbalistic ideas and these ideas that rest within the upper echelons of the Razin, what we're doing is we're drawing them down so that they can be applied in the real world experience of the mind and the heart of the individual themselves. Now, this inversion that the Baal Shem Tov introduces into Avodas Hashem, and that the Vilna Gaon also introduced, which reveals itself in the Derech of Musar and the Derech of the Tikkunim of the Midos and the 70 Midos that each person has. But what these two tzaddikim did, and the Ramchal and the Rashash as well, is that it was time to draw down the wisdom of the Arizal from the world of Atzilus, from the world of pure reflection and abstraction, and to draw it down into the world of emotional and lived experience. So when we talk about allowing the self to become the metaphor in which the upper teachings of Pnimius Torah are revealed, we're not reducing what we're doing. We're not saying, oh, we can't live in the world of Atzilus, and now we have to come down to human experience. That's certainly true. But the secret revelation that the Baal Shem Tov brought into reality was that in the human experience itself, those spiritual ideals and abstract concepts, which are very, very real, real in ways that we have no fathomability of, real in ways that are far more real than our conception of reality. But those principles get folded into this minimized experience of the human self and the vicissitudes of human experience, so that when I am trying to make space for my Bechira, I am actually creating a cause and a causal relationship between all of the Partsufim and all of the Oilamos that are taking shape up there. To the degree that when I'm working on myself and when I'm developing the ability to be a human being in this world with calmness and patience and Bechira, free will, which is ultimately the point of existence, I am not removing myself from the upper echelons of Pnimius HaTorah in their ideality, but rather I'm stretching them down to show that their ideals are so potent that they can be revealed within the realness of human experience as well. So these partsufim of Chachma and Bina reflect themselves within the mind and the heart of the individual, within the Moach and the Lev. These are the two guardians that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends down with us on the derech in life. I have the wisdom of my mind and I have the understanding of my heart. Now, the wisdom of the mind and the understanding of the heart, simply because we use different anatomical metaphors for them, it must be fundamentally understood that they are unified in all matters of unity. That there is no mind without a heart and there is no heart without a mind. Chachma and Bina, that initial burst of wisdom and the ideal ways of thinking that don't necessarily need to meet the parameters of reality, and my Bina, which is my orientation to reality itself, in spite of the fact that it looks so separate from one another, they're both fundamentally unified. Chachma and Bina are never separate. It's the secret of Abba and Ima, and the secret of Train Rayin Deloy Misparshin, two beloved expressions that are never far from one another. And it goes even farther than that. It's not that Chachma and Bina are always together, or that the Moach and the Lev, the mind and the heart, are always together. But each one contains the other within itself, because each one cannot be itself until it includes its opposite, which is the other. So that we have a klal that says within Chachma there's also an element of Bina, and within Bina there's also an element of Chachma, meaning to say within the mind there's an element of the heart, and within the heart there's an element of the mind. And the secret of Havein b'Chachma, understand within your wisdom, meaning understand the secret of your heart within your mind, and chacham bebina, mean understand the mind of your heart itself. So what does this mean for us practically? It used to be, medievally speaking, and in the not so distant past, that because intellectual processes were relegated to the intellectual spot in the mind, that the emotional process was relegated to a secondary position in the heart itself. Now, due to an absence of tools necessary to clarify true wisdom and true science and true anatomy, the assumption was that intellect and thought came from the mind, and that emotions were rooted in a different part of the body called the heart itself. Now, this was connected to the Cartesian process of the humor theory and the antiquated notions of self. But nevertheless, those ideas continue to remain true as we grapple with how to draw old ideas of self into a modern awareness of self, and to realize that each and every generation is just doing its best to estimate the truth, and therefore we don't have to necessarily push away the previous generation's truth in spite of the fact that it doesn't live up to the current generation's rigidity and clarification. We just have to know the secret of abstraction and translation and drawing out the old ideas that they were trying to lay claim to, but they just didn't have the ability to. And so the mind and the heart are not two separate territories. It just is that thought and emotions operate in such a distinct way. Thoughts and emotions operate in such diametrically opposed manner that the only reasonable conclusion to come to was that these two things are taking place from two completely separate parts of the body. That thinking is something that's relegated to the brain, and that feeling or emotions is something that's relegated to the heart. And as a result of that assumption, it cannot be that these two opposites are coming from the same place. So it was assumed that the emotions had to come from a place other than the mind, which was the heart as the king of the body. Nowadays, what we understand is that there's no emotional connection to the cardiovascular system other than the stress that is induced upon it. But there is an element that neuroscientists and neuropsychologists and effective neuropsychologists are referring to as the heart of the brain, meaning to say the emotional territory of the brain itself, so that they're right. The mind and the heart are vastly separate from one another to the degree that thinking and feeling, thought and emotion represent two diametrically opposed pathways in which the human being is going to experience life. But nevertheless, that doesn't mean that they're separate in terms of a location. They both operate within this unified secret called the moach, through the mind. But the moach is going to split itself up into two different parts. The mind that remains in the mind in pure intellectual abstraction and living in the ideality and the transcendence of not needing to deal with reality. And then the secret territory of the heart, which draws down that wisdom across the very, very narrow bridge of the neck, which separates between the mind and the body. And it allows wisdom to now become an embodied experience that now is felt in a real way. It's not just thought about in an abstract way, but it's felt in a real way. And so while thought and emotion both are rooted in the brain, and that emotion is not necessarily rooted in the heart whatsoever, nevertheless, there is an understanding that there is the chachma in the mind, and then there is the lave within the mind, which is the ability to understand how to draw wisdom down into lived experience. And these are the two elements that go with a person wherever they are. In my moach, I have the ability of developing a judgment based on intellectual thought and speculation about the reality outside of me. And that's informed by my sensual experience, by my eyes, what my eyes see, what my ears have the ability to hear. Amir Hashem, the coming of Mashiach, our noses are also going to be part and parcel of that wisdom experience of taking a deep breath. The mouth has the capacity to converse. All of those gateways of the self, those seven gateways, the two eyes, the two ears, the two nostrils, and the mouth, those serve chachma to the degree that they draw experience inwards by way of encountering phenomenon. And then the mind has a cold, calm, and collected analysis of it, and it understands what it understands, and it doesn't deviate from that. That's the nature of the mind. The lave, on the other hand, the emotional territory, is not nearly as cool, calm, and collected. It's more feverish, it's more sped up, it's more intensified. The dam, the blood, the gvuros are far more included there, and therefore it feels more real, it feels visceral, it feels as if this emotion has actually become something different than a thought, but it's actually a felt experience. It's now entering into the territory of the body itself, in that place of the heart where the self feels far more deeply what it thinks. Thinking can be very clean, but it doesn't necessarily connect on the deepest level to the viscerality and to the experience of self itself. It's specifically in the emotionally felt experiences that a person is encountering themselves with utmost intensity. And so in both of these places, we're given the ability to have a moach that can give us machshavos tovos, that can give me good thoughts, good ways of thinking, good ways of looking, a healthy outlook upon the world based on the Yud Gimel Ikrei Amuna, based on the postulates of faith that I've accepted because I've chosen them. And ultimately, one can develop a very clean way of thinking and a clear way of thinking so that the machshava becomes a clarified space in which the self can enjoy itself and it has a proper understanding of the world. And so too with the heart. The heart is the place where the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara have the ability of creating the drives towards creativity, towards manifestation, towards experience, towards wanting the neshama to benefit from the body, towards wanting real experience to feel real, for there to be an engraving, for me to feel something visceral, to feel joy, to feel fear, to feel excitement, to feel sadness, whatever the emotional hue is, and to rectify the chesed and the loving kindness that is emergent from the self, and the gvura and the constriction and that tendency towards withdrawal in the self, and all of the various gradations of emotional hues through which we tend to see existence. And it is this territory where an individual can transform everything. Gam ha'olam nasan belibam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us the ability to uncover a leiv tov, to see good things and to feel good things, and to learn the secret of emotions and how to regulate our emotions. But that was more true when there was Bechira, when we had a semblance of Bechira. When there was space given for an individual to react to reality, to think a certain way about what's happening, to feel a certain way about what's happening. So then the individual had the freedom to be able to choose based on their best self, that which I should be thinking about and that which I should try and be feeling. And that experience was always born out of what I shouldn't be thinking about and also what I shouldn't be feeling. But when phenomenon begin to speed up, and the self is mibulbal, and the self is exposed to the rapid speed in which things begin to take shape, and the flowing nature of thought is so quick that I haven't even finished thinking the first thought, that it has already awoken a second thought, and that second thought has not even started yet, and the third thought is there, and all of the endless ruminations of thought where the end becomes the beginning and the beginning becomes the end, and I thought I was coming to an end of my thought so that I can grasp something, but then suddenly I'm somehow back at the beginning in a new expression of the same old, and I'm stuck in this mind trap of repetitious cycles of thought over and over, in which the speed of experience disables me from being able to choose how I would like to think. And when I no longer have the freedom to choose how I would like to think, my thoughts fall prey to the tendency to simply develop previously conceived modes of thinking. The mind has to think, it has to respond to reality. But if it doesn't have the space in which it can actually take a pause to actually think about something, it's forced to remember what it thought last time. And if I'm remembering what I thought last time, hey, that's simple. I could just think that over and over. And then slowly but surely, a person develops chametz of the mind, where I am now operating with cognitive distortions that feel fundamentally real because they've become so engraved. Why? Because I've thought them over and over. Why? Because I didn't have time to think any other way. Why? Because everything was moving so fast. And so we develop these new and old broken models of thinking that keep us stuck. So we see how the rapid speed and the rapid exposure to the intensity of thinking and feeling all different types of things, it takes a person away from the ability to make a choice as to how they would like to think. And the same is true with the lave on an even more intense level, because not only is the lave conscious of what it is feeling, it's also feeling what it's feeling. The thought doesn't feel itself, thought thinks itself, and what thinking is in its source, and the invisibility of thought, and how thought folds onto itself and nothingness becomes something in spite of the fact that it never actually stops being nothing itself. That's the nature of thinking. Thinking doesn't feel itself. Feelings think themselves and they feel themselves. And when I'm feeling something about myself, it's far more difficult to actually develop a clean point of vision where I'm able to objectively look at the circumstances. The heart is the place of subjective involvement. And once I'm already subjectively involved, all of those memories of the previous ways of feeling and experiencing are all flushing back to me over and over and over again. And so if the mind gets congested and it becomes overwhelmed and filled and saturated to the degree that I don't have a choice of how I would like to think, all the more so the heart grows tired and it feels saturated and it's stuck and it's libi and it's filled to such a place that a person doesn't have the ability to choose how they would like to feel. And these are the two places that we have to make a halal. The halala de Gilgalta and libi halal bakirbi. To make it simsum, to make a tzimtzum, just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kavyachol makes a tzimtzum, so too we have to make a tzimtzum. What is the tzimtzum that we have to make for ourselves in order to create space? First and foremost, a person has to believe in their capacity to put a stop to the flow. The flow is not the most natural thing. The flow is not the end all be all or the purpose of experience. The flow is simply that which is inundating us to the degree that we've come to believe that that is the main way that we function in this world. But the truest expression of the self is in the capacity to withdraw from the experience of what my mind is thinking and what my heart is feeling, and to dig down deeper into myself to create a point of reflection where I'm able to now look out from an objective perspective about what my mind is thinking and what my heart is feeling. That as of now, we operate in a place where we're stuck almost like in a first person level of experience where if my mind is thinking it, that's what it is. And if my heart is feeling it, that's what it is, because I've identified the externalizations of my thought and my heart as the essential point of myself. But that comes along with only looking at myself based on my external garments of self. But when I come to believe in the cavernous depths of the self, and the five levels and the five levels within the five levels, and the fact that the soul contains the infinite, and if the soul contains a spark of the infinite, then the soul is deeper and wider than we can ever imagine. And by taking a step back from that narrowed vision of only grasping the externality of things, where I'm forced to respond on the fly and the fly has gotten too quickly and I'm no longer able to respond, so I just learn how to function in the dysfunctionality of it all. By taking a step back, what I'm doing is I'm not escaping from reality. I'm extending the inner territory of the self so that I redevelop new positions and new strengths with which to come back and face reality in a healthy way. The goal is always reality, but it's only by way of retreating into the self, not into a fear or a fetal position where I can't handle the outside, but rather it's a retreat back into the silence of the self where I uncover the vistas and the potential that rests within there. The first thing I have to do is I stop, I pause, and I realize that I can pause the thought. Pausing the thought doesn't mean stopping the flow of the thought. It means stopping to track the thought. It means let me stop examining how far this thought is going to go out and where it's going to take me if I allow my mind to be taken by the flow of that negative thought. The natural desire to abandon ourselves to the natural proclivity of the self, as the Chazon Ish said, is the fundamental character trait which leads us astray. It's the relinquishment of my control that comes about as a result of the yeyush that is induced upon me by way of experience. But it's only when I learn the secret of afal pikein ein shum yeyush, I can never lose hope on my ability to pause and to stop and to detach myself from the attachment that I am giving to the thought or to the emotion. That is the first instantiation of a halal. It's making space. Just as HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinite light was all saturating, so too, Kavyachol, our thoughts and the flow of our thoughts and our feelings are all saturating. And in that all saturated point, so there is no space for anything other than that saturating thing to be present, and therefore there's no possibility of otherness, then there's no possibility of creation or creativity or rectification or redemption. And so what does Hashem do, so to speak? He's mitzamsem himself. He makes a halal. He contracts into himself. He takes all of that potency, so to say, that was previously revealed, and he utilizes that very potency to limit his potency. The amount of godliness revealed after the tzimtzum and before the tzimtzum is the same. It's just a redistribution of energy, so to say. That prior to it, all of the expression was expressed in all of its totality. After the tzimtzum, the way that it's expressing itself is by way of containment. It's utilizing the strength and the expressivity of the mind to coalesce backwards into itself to create a limit point, to say, what would it be like if I actually put effort into stopping my thought, to thinking about nothing, to allowing my mind to become a vacuum. Now, the mind abhors a vacuum, and that's not what we're talking about here. We're not trying to meditate on emptiness. What we're trying to do is we're trying to gather all of our strength to create walls to our thinking. The Leshem points out that the Shemot, the Kalim that we associate with the Mochen are all Shemot of Elokim. They're names of severity and Gvura. Why? Because the mind must operate like walls of steel. The mind is the mem stuma. It's the moyach stima that allows itself to close itself inwards to prevent that which it doesn't want to enter and to hold that which is on the inside. And slowly but surely making the choice to act this way, to actually set a limit to our thought and to make it symptom of our thought, and to spend 20 seconds thinking about nothing, realizing that I can actually think about the active process of thinking about nothing for far longer than I thought I could. And when I allow those thoughts to run past me and all of those thoughts which I thought I needed to catch up with and the all saturated nature of my mind, I create a revach, I create a space. There's spacing made. And in that space, I realize that, okay, I have an empty space within my mind now that's not preoccupied with all of the floods of the thought. And now I can begin the process of choosing what I would like to think about, choosing how I would like to think. But the first step is making space, is making that halal. So too in the heart, the libi halal bakirbi, it's gathering all of the strength to minimize the intensity of my heart and the all saturating nature of any emotion that's felt in its intensity and the viscerality of it. It's only when I allow myself to say, okay, this feels so incredibly real, so there is a potency of feeling here. But let me try and now utilize that potency of feeling, the intense burning desire at the heart, and let me redirect that desire to create a libi chalal bakirbi, to create a space, to create a ring of fire within the heart that allows for revelation to take place. Like Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, who, when he was learning, every bird that flew above his head burnt up into flames, meaning to say that every thought, every deviant thought, every thought that took him away from where he was at this moment in the empty space of his mind and heart being prepared to face reality, it burnt up. It didn't distract him. We have the ability of pausing. We have the ability of slowing down. We have the ability of choosing throughout our day moments in which we would like to utilize Bechira, to choose to think a certain way. And when I choose to think a certain way, I suddenly begin to learn the secret of choosing to feel a certain way as well. When I can make the halal in my mind and the halal in my heart, and the secret of nikavim, nikavim, chalulim, chalulim, galui v'yadua lefnei kisei kvoidecha. She'im yifaseach echad mehem, o yistem echad mehem, yeh efshar litkayim lamod lefanecha afilu sha'achas. That the only way that I can live with a sha'a achas, the only way that I can live with the secret of this moment, this hour, this rega, and not be overwhelmed by the rapid fluid flow of my thinking or my feeling at every moment, is the secret of nekavim, nekavim, chalulim, chalulim. The double nature of chalulim. I have to make a halal in my mind, and I have to make a halal in my heart, and I have to awaken myself to the singular bechira that I have, which is to detach myself from the rapid flow of the scene and to gain a hair's breadth of a point of choosing, a vantage point from inside the cave of the self. Now, this is still prior to any element of revelation. This is still just the beginning of the work of etching, of engraving within the self, of charus al haluchos, engraved within the stone tablets of the heart. That engraving, that erasure, that cutting away. Our mind has to cultivate itself to become like the shamir worm. The shamir worm doesn't create by way of addition. It creates by way of subtraction. It eats away at the heart of stone, as Rabbi Nachman points out, and it makes space. And to allow ourselves to tarry in that space. And it's very difficult because we're so prone to that fundamental desire towards productivity. But when we can live with that halal, we open ourselves up. In the secret of Yechailel Ayalo, says the Heiliger of Aaron Halevi points out in his Drush and Shmini Atzeres that we have to make halalim in our mind of Bina and in our hearts of Malchus. We have to create space for Hashem to reveal himself. And it's only there that a person has the ability of actually being a Baal Bechira. If I am abandoned to the natural proclivity of the speed in which the self is overwhelmed by the way that I've thought in the past, then I'm not a Baal Bechira. Then I still no longer have the ability to choose how I would like to feel or think, and I'm living my life in reaction to the stimuli. The secret of Bechira is shifting from a reactive position and entering into a proactive position. This is how David HaMelech wakes up. This is how Shulchan Aruch starts. Hu Ye'oyer HaShachar, that we need to be the ones who awake in the morning. What does it mean to be the one who awakens the morning of the day? To be awoken by the morning means that the day hits me on the head and the natural proclivity of the intensity of self and all of its fullness to the degree that I can't think anything and I can't feel anything because there's no space for me to even make a choice as to what or how I would like to think or feel. So then the day is having its way with me, and what the day brings is going to be what the day brings, and each day in its heaviness, and each day in its difficulty, and each day in its bland nature. And a person is going to be a victim to the day. And the only thing a person can do when they're a victim to the day is find more people to blame for that victimhood and cultivate resentments and inner rage and anger and depression and all of those self-destroying parts of self that are the opposite of life. But if I choose to awaken the day, which means that I am the one who is entering in with the upper hand now, I am not being surprised by reality. Reality is being surprised by me. When reality hits my mind, it will be surprised that, oh, there's a space here, which this individual now has the ability to choose how they would like to react. And so too in the heart. This is the work of choosing. This is the work of the tzimtzum. This is where the cave develops. And it's only in the cave, in the engraving inwards, the privation, the quietude, the cultivation of a patience and the willingness to be sovil, to tolerate what? To tolerate not reacting, to tolerate not choosing to think or to judge, but rather recognizing that, wait, let me sit in the silence here because it demands so much energy, it demands so much effort of the mind to create that severe shape of itself where it can keep out that which needs to be kept out. It needs to be like a choma. It needs to be like a barrier. It has to have walls. Alchom Mosayach Yerushalayim Ifkadati Shomrim. Yerushalayim is the secret place of the mind, and the Kodesh Hakadoshim is the secret place within the secret place of the mind. And the Etzem Aluz and the Evan Hashasiyah, all of the depths and the gradations of the mind. But without the chomos, without the kotel, without the walls that keep it in and maintain the secrecy of it, we have nothing. It's the walls, it's the gevura of the mind, it's the decision to stop the flow and to sit within the absence of the flow and to become the dam to the flow, to allow the flow to stop so that it can begin to congeal. That congealment process begins when a person cultivates within their mind the momentary choice of ad kan tavo. Up until this point, I am going to be carried away. Right here, I'm going to live with a yesiv pesik. I'm going to sit and I'm going to stop and I'm going to allow myself to choose how I would like to relate to reality. This is the extension of the Nekudas HaBechira. This is the secret of the slight development of more space that rests in between the stimuli and the response, which is the place of freedom, which is the place of free choice, which is the halal of the mind and the halal of the heart. These are the two tools that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us, the mayach and the leiv, chachma and bina. The mind has the ability of developing the positive judgment, the general positive judgments about the day. When I wake up, I am going to think good thoughts today. I'm able to think in abstraction. I'm able to think grandiose thoughts of unity and say everything is good, Hashem is good, the world is good, and redemption is going to be good. On the level of thought, Chachma is saying, I'm going to see only good. And the heart is the preparation to experience the good and the bad. And it's ultimately only when we have the ability of making space of that halal, of leaning into the tzimtzum, that we're able to develop this possibility. A meditation that we've spoken about in the past, and a good way of thinking about this, is that we use the language of I'm in a mood. I'm in a mood. It's not that the mood is in me, but rather I'm in a mood. Because when the emotional wavelength is so saturated and the body is feeling it and the mind is overwhelmed by the thoughts of the feeling itself, and a person melts into that mood and they give up and they let themselves just be carried away by whatever mood it is. So the implication is that I am surrounded by this. This is not something that is in me. I am in this thing. I am victim to the mood right now. That's what happens when a person gives up in the fight against that negative emotional hue and they allow themselves to kind of rest in it and wallow in it in that kind of warm mikvah type experience that is so pleasurable, where a person enables themselves just to be stuck in their stuckness, because at that point, at least a person feels the relief of stopping to break out of their stuckness, an artificial relief of stopping to try, of a taste of hopelessness. But then suddenly a person is awoken and they realize that, okay, there's no hopelessness and I have to break myself out of the mood. I have to break myself out of this room. So to be in a mood means to be in a room, which means that if I can prepare myself before I enter into that room and be aware of how to handle the mood and how to handle that emotional wavelength right now, because I've created a space for Bechira, so then a person is going to have a better angle of a better vantage point from which they can enter in with strength. And this is taught to us over and over in any spatial coordinates that we enter into. There's a mezuzah. There's a mezuzah that rests at the doorpost, that rests in between this moment and that moment, this room and that room. The liminal territory, the crossroads, that point of the inside and the outside, where I'm unconscious and now I'm going to choose to be conscious, where I'm caught up in that flow of it all without any bechira, and I'm choosing to make a tzimtzum and recreate a world. The threshold of the door is the creation of a new world. Anytime I walk into a room, it's a good way of framing that as an experience. When I walk into my house, I'm in my house. When I walk into the office, I'm in the office. When I walk into the shul, I'm in the shul. The bathroom is the bathroom. Each place is its own self and isolated experience from the moment I walk into it to the moment that I walk out of it. And one of the things that we can think about to prepare ourselves for this, for trying to get the upper hand on reality, so that we can we can already be prepared for what reality throws at us, rather than having reality force us to be unprepared, by creating that halal in the mind and in the heart, that point of outlook, which enables me to think and reflect. So the mezuzah is there, and it reminds me of one thing, Shin Dalid Yud, the secret of Hashem's name, Shakai, which represents limitation, containment, and enoughness. Chazal have two understandings of the word Shakai, of the name Shakai. One is that God, in the origination of existence, allowed his potencies to unfold themselves with intensity and without limit, and his expression continued to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow to the degree that it was returning back to infinitude. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, created a Ga'ara within himself, created a limit, and that is Sha'amar Dai La'olamo. He said, stop expanding. So dai represents the limit point, where I am saying I'm entering into this room, and just as God had to stop the extended flow, the endless flow, so too I am stopping the endless and unrestricted flow of my mind and my heart, and I am creating a territory where I am going to have a moment of calmness that enables me to respond in a cool, calm, and collected way with Yishav Hadas, only because I've created a space. Hine makom iti. There is a ma'ara, there is a cave now in the mind where I can cultivate the process of learning the wisdom of how to respond to the situation. That's the first understanding of Shakai, which is that I have to stop allowing myself to expand. I can't be operating in the natural way, in the natural proclivities of the self. I must take a stand and create the framework that I would like to enter in with. And the other interpretation of the Shem Shakai, which are both obviously fundamentally connected to one another, is Sheyesh Dai Be'elukusa L'chol Bria V'Bria. There is enough godliness for each and every creature, for each and every creation. Now, this is a different orientation towards enoughness. I'm not only stopping myself from the endless flow, but I'm also becoming okay with stopping myself from the endless flow. Because to stop oneself from the endless flow, I can train myself to do that. But to feel good about it and to feel that this is where my production is going to come from, that's another nace, because we've been taught that productivity comes about by the opposite of stopping, but only by continuation and flow. And so the two-pronged expression of Shakai is that I am stopping myself, I'm placing a limit, and the real work of self and the real work of productivity is going to take shape within that negative space of the mind, not negative by way of judgment, but negative by way of absence of something that is not there. It's obviously a presence of absence, like the tzimtzum, it's the butzina de kardenusa, the darkened candle and the illumination of limitation within the mind itself, the secret of midos, as we're going to see, of character traits. It's from the same language as measurements because they're one and the same. It's a way of containing the endless flow. And so I'm stopping myself, and I'm also feeling that I'm enough in the moment. And I'm also understanding that to work on my midos, to work on my reaction time, to work on how do I live in this world, how do I face today, this is ultimately the greatest thing that a person can do. This is the dir b'tachtonim. Hashem wants to rest in the mind, but he also wants even more so to rest within the mind that descends down into the heart, that descends down into the body itself. What we're going to discuss next week, Be'ezras Hashem, are the compartments of self, the three-part breakdown of self, which is ultimately the muskal, the murgash, and the mutva, my intellectual self, my murgash, my emotional self, and my murgal, my habituated self. Those correspond to the muskal, which is chachma, bina, and das, the properties of intellectualization, where I have to make the halal to think properly. The murgash, the felt sense of emotional experience, is going to be chagat, chesed, gvura, and teferes, where I have to make that halal in the lave. And the murgal, or the mutva, is going to be the habituated territory of the body, which is going to be the netzachod and yesod. And then all three of those levels, which contain three within themselves, are going to be 9. And then the sum total of that is 10, which is the partsif of the individual. And we're going to discuss next week that what we're trying to do is develop a unity between the muskal, our minds, our murgash, our hearts, and our mutva, which is our body, but it's only going to be by way of the secret of the intermediary level. Just as we spoke about the door as the threshold that rests in between the inside and the outside, holding both together, so too, each and every level is connected by the lowest level of the higher level, which becomes the higher level of the lower level. So we're going to see that the only way that the mind can connect to the heart is the secret middle path of the lowest part of the mind, which becomes the mind of the heart. And the only time that the heart can connect to the body is where the lowest part of the heart, which is the body of the heart, begins to be the mind of the body. And we're going to see how these interconnecting parts of ourselves, these intermediary territories of the self, are going to be the bridge in which we own the capacity of drawing down the wisdom of the mind and drawing it into the lived experience of the heart. That point of transference is ultimately referred to as the koyach of the medama. The koyach medama, the power of imagination, is the in-between. It's the bridge that rests between intellectualization and the experience of emotions. And we're going to speak about how it's ultimately through the medama, biyad ha-neviim medama, in the hands of the neviim, through their imagination, a person draws down prophecy. So too, when it comes to refining these spaces, after making space and becoming proactive, the next thing we're going to do is define what that space is. And then we're going to enter into the shirim that we listed, which is the avoda of the day itself, Be'ezras Hashem.